Welcome to the REM User Guide video 5. In this video we will show how to use the tools Batchfile facility. The Batchfile facility is located in the Advanced Inputs option panel of the Emissions Input page. To create a batch file, enter inputs into the Emissions Input page as if performing an ordinary emissions run. Advanced inputs can also be selected. The exception to this is the receptor input files and bus flow input files, which are not compatible with batch files. For this demonstration, I won't use any advanced input options. Once all inputs have been selected, the run needs to be assigned a name. The Add Current Inputs to Batch File button can now be selected. Once the first run is added to the batch file, 3 more buttons appear in the user interface. I'll add another run into the batch file, then show these buttons in action. The 3 buttons which have newly appeared in the user interface are View Batch File button, which shows a summary of the runs currently in the batch file. Here we have the first one I did, example DS_2023, with the associated input options. And same again for the second run I added, DM2023. We've got a Clear Batch File button, which removes all runs from the batch file, and the Remove a Run from Batch File button, where we can select any of the runs which are currently in the batch file and remove them. We won't use this option here. Once we have one or more run in the batch file, we can select the Save the Batch File or Run. Let's save this one with 2 runs in. Saved batch files go into user's default downloads folder with the name rem_batchfile.rem. The file can be moved to a different location, and the file name can also be changed as long as the .rem extension is retained. Now we have a saved batch file, we can use this to access these runs in future sessions. I'll restart this session now to demonstrate accessing the saved batch file in a completely new session. To load the batch file, navigate to the Load Batch File section of the Batch File facility and select the batch file to be loaded into the tool. We can see that once loaded, the indicator showing the number of runs in the current batch file changes as we'd expect. We can use the buttons to view the batch file and see that it's the same runs that we've previously saved. At this point, we could also run the batch file, we could remove runs, or we could clear it if we wanted. But for this demonstration, I'll add more runs to this batch file. Note that if you enter a run name which has previously been taken, for example, we already have one called example_DS_2040. If I try to add a new run with that same name, we get an error message to let us know that name is already taken. Now that we've got 4 runs in this batch file, I'll save the batch file just for my own record and QA by hitting the Save Batch File button. Now I'll run the batch file. Once the Run the Batch File button has been selected, we're automatically taken to the batch file output page while the tool cycles through each run, calculating emissions. Once this is done, we can select which run to view in each tab. The tables are also available to download in the Downloads menu. Each run can be selected to be viewed with this drop-down box. Similar to the ordinary emissions run, we display annual total emissions, annual total TII emissions, and a detailed emissions breakdown for each run. The detailed emissions breakdown has a selector for output metric as well. The tool has been designed so that the batch file facility can be used to streamline calculation of emissions for multiple scenarios, as we've just demonstrated. It can also be used to streamline the economic value of emissions, if required, as alluded to in the previous video. To use batch outputs to perform an economic valuation, navigate to the Monetization Inputs page. Enter the standard parameters as required. In the Advanced Inputs option box, select Populate Table from a batch file. In the Modal box, enter the relevant run names into each scenario. In this demonstration, I don't want to enter horizon year, so I'll leave that option as not applicable. We can see that the data have been taken into the emissions output table. We can view the results in the same manner as shown previously. The output from the batch file and monetization calculations are available to download in the Downloads menu.